Good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Linda Weintraub. Linda is a curator, educator, artist, and writer. In her books, she aims to make what she calls the outposts of contemporary art accessible to broad audiences. The current vanguard, in her view, manifests as an environmental consciousness that is both the signal feature of 21st century industry, architecture, science, and philosophy, and also the defining characteristic of contemporary culture and contemporary art. A prolific author, Linda has written several books on contemporary art and ecology, including What's Next? Eco-Materialism in Contemporary Art, 2018, To Life, Eco-Art in Pursuit of a Sustainable Planet, 2012, and Avant-Gardians, 2007, a series, as well as a series of shorter books or textlets with provocatively playful titles like Environmentalities, 22 Approaches to Eco-Art. Also of note in this context is her book, In the Making, Creative Options for Contemporary Art, of 2003, in which Linda identifies ways of becoming an artist that are often neglected, from choosing your audience and defining your mission, inspiration, and attitude, to rethinking what it means to be a successful artist, something that I actually think a lot about. Meanwhile, Linda's been applying her ecological ideas and concerns to her personal life by managing a sustainable homestead where she practices permaculture in upstate New York. Linda served as the director of the Edith C. Blum Art Institute at Bard College, and also as the Henry Luce Professor of Emerging Arts at Oberlin College. And she currently teaches in the MFA program at the University of Hartford. She has curated many, many exhibitions and has exhibited her own work widely and received an MFA from Rutgers University. Linda's work, to me, is incredibly important and relevant. And please join me in giving her a warm welcome this evening.
So thank you all. Thank you, Mark, for inviting me. And it's great to see your faces. I hope to hear from many of you later on, because I have a feeling what I'm about to say might provoke some commentary. And I look forward to receiving that, because I seem to always position myself at the controversial frontier of what's going on in the culture. And because I'm so old, that frontier has continually moved along. And so I've been scurrying to keep up with it. So what you're going to hear tonight is my current, I wouldn't say interest, I would say, and because it deviates from traditional, conventional Western art practices, I think our Zoom presentation, our interaction here is going to also have to deviate in order to represent that. So what I try to do in this Zoom presentation and in my own work and as a curator and as an author is to de-emphasize the role of an object and really highlight the response of the audience. So in this regard, what I've been focusing on is helping, providing opportunities for people to reconnect with the material world. And I do that not in the state of defiance or anger or anything, but just simply to share some of the deep pleasures I've learned to enjoy really late in life, and how I see how those pleasures fall into a category. And that category is what is very unlike typical Western contemporary experiences. So if you think about it, we've kind of grown accustomed in this country to living in a relatively dematerialized form of reality. So many of our experiences are filtered through the media and are computer generated. It's easy for us to neglect real objects and also the surroundings in which those physical objects take place. So I would say two words that characterize life today is objects we are disembodied and our surroundings are dislocated. And so in so many ways, we become detached from the physical environment. And what I try so hard to do is reestablish and reconnect people to what otherwise would be a neglected part of their life. So what I focus on is audience response. I'm more interested in giving an opportunity for the audience to have an experience than in presenting something that I have created out of my own will and mind. So that's what we're going to do tonight. And what I hope to do is instill just a little bit of wonder regarding something that may not have attracted your attention before. And I use the word wonder in two regards. One is, do you wonder about an object's origin, its formation, its disposition, its design, its functions, all the physicality of it? But on the other side, I pay a lot of attention to the other meaning of wonder, which is awe, which is deep, remarkable amazement at the wonder of a simple object. So I'm not so interested in majestic mountains and primeval forests and great seascapes, but really I apply those values to the most common and mundane kinds of objects. So I'm more interested in acorns, in a patch of moss, in a pine cone, seed pods, feathers, bits of bone, and share with people the opportunity provided by these humble materials to instill two kinds of wonder. So that is why I asked you all to have access to an ice cube. And I wonder if you could all scurry, go get your ice cubes, put them on a paper towel and come on back and I'll show you how I work with common objects. Okay, those of you who don't have an ice cube, kind of do it in your mind, okay? I'm gonna ask you to go through a kind of guided meditation on the ice cube. So I declare this ice cube part of an artwork, and I would hope you would attend to it as if you were looking at a work of art, which means you pay particular attention to every little detail, you're conscious of the aesthetics of it. And so I'll ask you a few questions and you kind of apply them, please, to your ice cube. So can you look at it, please, from every different angle? And look at it in the manner of looking at something so precious like a diamond or an old artifact. When you look at your particular ice cube, are its edges sharp or are they curved and soft, rounded? Is your ice cube clear or does it have crystals inside? Can you note whatever patterns and tones and shapes might be part of the experience of your ice cube? When you hold it in your hand, does it feel heavy or light? Can you name all of its unique qualities? Okay, now let's do something else. Let's reverse this relationship. And can you imagine the condition of your ice cube from the ice cube's point of view? How do you imagine the ice cube feels right now? Is it comforted by being in the palm of your hand? Or does it fear that condition? Where would it prefer to be? Would it like to be on your desk or someplace else? Do you think right at this moment your ice cube feels confident that it's safe and the environment is conducive to its survival, or do you think it feels fearful? So when I ask these questions, what I'm hoping is that maybe you could develop with the humble ice cube the kind of emotional connection you have with a pet. So you can now please proclaim your ice cube your pet and maybe interact with it in the manner that you interact with a pet, which means you're going to care a lot about the well-being of this ice cube. You really want to ensure its comfort and safety. Not only that, you get pleasure out of managing the well-being of this ice cube, just like you do when you take care of your dog and give it treats. And even though you know it is inevitable that the ice cube is going to melt, just like your pet is going to die, pet owners do everything they possibly can to ensure that their pet has a long and healthy life. All right. So what I'd like you to do next is stay in your seat, but think of what you would do with your pet ice cube to ensure that it survives just as long as it possibly can. Okay, where would you put it so that it's protected and preserved and the melting takes place inevitably, but ever so slowly? So where would you put it? Would you wrap it up or would you expose it? Would you shield it from light? Would you hold it in your hands? Would you put it in your pocket, under your chair, in your shoe? Do something with your ice cube so that you hope it will slow down the inevitable melting and your ice cube will survive longer. Okay, everybody do something. Okay, so we are going to return to the ice cubes later to see how many of you still have a remnant of your pet and we'll see how long it's survived. But okay, this is like chapter 2. That was chapter 1 of this multi-part talk. I gave the talk the title I and I pronoun and I of the I in your visual sense. So I'd like to talk about the pronoun first. I'd like to talk about the physical part of your face second, and then I'd like to put the two together. This all sounds very strange, but it has absolutely everything to do with not only my practice, but with yours as well. So I hope that you'll consider everything that I'm saying in a very personal way and see how it may affect the way you make art. Okay, so let's talk about the pronoun I. And I wonder, have you ever wondered why I is capitalized? This question is really interesting. It's more interesting you realize that it's the only pronoun in the English language that is capitalized. And not only that, but English is the only language that has this convention of capitalizing the I. And so I've been pondering the significance of this, and I've concluded that it's a lot more than a silly little curiosity. When you think about it, capital always signifies most important. We've got capital cities and capital ideas and capital punishment. And it means that we who speak the English language feel that I is more important than any other pronoun. So I is more important than we, more important than you, more important than they. And of course, we have to think about capitalism, in which the very values elevate the significance of the I, because it is engaging in self-fulfillment and individual opportunity, personal wealth, private ownership. So the capital I really believe is an indicator of a very significant and prevailing attitude. It signals a kind of philosophical approach to being human. Associated with it is an ethic and even an aesthetic. And I think it is not unreasonable to think of the capital I as being an indicator of what we call the Western mindset. And I can't help but think, what if we just changed that convention and we refer to I with a little white straight line and a little dot on top? I mean, I even wonder, can you imagine yourself as a little straight line and a dot on top? And I wonder if by reducing the importance of I, we would also begin to shift the Western mindset. So this kind of consideration has prevailed throughout my own art making, my curating, my writing, my homesteading. I'm really interested in seeing if we can somehow change one of these basic and fundamental conditions of Western culture. Okay, so that's the I, the pronoun. Now what about the eyes on your head? So if I was to hold this up, can you all see it? I should go back here. Yeah. And if I was to ask you, do you know this object? If we were all together, I would ask somebody, and I think the answer would be, of course, I know this object. This object is a pineapple. And then I might ask you, by what means did you deduce that? And you might say, well, goodness, it's silly, it's simple, it's observation. I can see its shape, its color, its size. They all indicate to me we've got a pineapple. And then I might ask you, are you really satisfied that you know this object? Do you think you have enough information to say that you know this object? And if you're confident and you say yes, you are definitely a product of the Western contemporary world that we all share. It means that you are happy and confident and content, having no information about this pineapple except what it tells you on the surface. And so we might also pay attention then to what you do not know about the pineapple based on vision. All right, we don't know how heavy it is. You don't know if it's soft or hard, or if it's not symmetrical. Is it different on one side from the other? You don't know how it smells. You don't know if there is a sound when it's tapped. You don't know if the leaves on the top of the pineapple are secure or loose. You don't know what the texture is. Is it symmetrical? Is it bumpy? Is it rather smooth? Is it prickly? You don't know if it will balance on its base. You don't know if it feels moist, and you certainly don't know how it tastes. So we rely a lot on vision, on the eye as a sensory organ that gives us our information. But when we do that, we are denying ourselves the rest of our bodily senses and all the information that they can give us as well. When I was choosing an object, it occurred to me, I think it is so bizarre that cooking shows on television seem to be so popular. And I say, that is really amazing, because when you see food on television, you can't taste it, you can't smell it, you can't touch it, it doesn't nourish you, and it doesn't even satisfy your hunger. So it's missing all the essence of eating it. We're happy and satisfied, fascinated, it seems, by watching shows that depict food. So here we are neglecting multiple opportunities for getting information, and we rely so much on our eyes. It's been estimated that 83% of the information we get from the environment comes through our eyes. So for a long, long time, the scientific community thought that the human brain was hardwired to privilege vision over any other sense. But recently, that belief has been overturned. New research contradicts this. It says, absolutely, most cultures privilege one sensory condition over another, but they do not all privilege vision. So there are some interesting examples of that. They say people who live in tropical rainforests, for instance, don't rely on vision. The dense foliage obstructs vision and really limits the amount of information they can get. They are much more inclined to privilege the ear because sounds can travel through the rainforest. Other examples, touch seems to be much more prominent in cultures that have crafting traditions. Sound is also privileged in non-literate societies where information is conveyed orally, audibly, so that the ear is much more important. So when we say vision seems to be dominant, it's dominant in Western cultures, and we have to wonder about what that means, what does it signify, how is it important, how is it manifest? We have so many opportunities in our culture to connect with things through visual information only. Certainly, there are all of the visual technologies that we use, like Instagram and Facebook, YouTube, and Photo Circle and Flickr and all the others. Visual literacy courses are taught. Visual cultural studies departments are founded in many different colleges. I don't know of any smell literacy courses or touch touch culture studies departments. So Westerners are really committed to seeing, that seeing is a reality. And there's even the phrase seeing is believing. We don't have smelling is believing or hearing is believing. Seeing is believing. So we've got two kinds of I that are really dominant in the cultures that we are now sharing. There's the I, me, and there's the I in your head. So let's talk about what happens when you put these two together. There is a really significant component of both of these that resonates throughout culture and definitely affects art. And that is both I's, both kinds of I's, isolate the individual, give the impression that the individual is autonomous and discrete, and that both of these together have become a really entrenched cultural norm. So let me explain this, okay? What happens when we look at something? In order to see it, there has to be a space between us. We are separated from the thing that we are observing. And there is no physical connection as there is with touch and taste, for instance. Not only that, when you look at something, the sense of looking is very particular and different from the other senses in that the eyes focus. Okay, when you focus on something, you're selecting not only where to look, but if you should look, because you can close your eyes and open them. So you are absolutely in charge of what you see, and what you see is unique just to you. And when we see, because we're focusing, we see one object at a time. You are separated from the object you're observing. The object is separated from the environment that it's in. If you compare this with sound, I think this becomes apparent how important it is, because with sounds, you have no lids, you have no flaps, you can't stop sound from coming in. You don't have focus, it's not one sound at a time. We can hear sounds that surround us simultaneously from multiple different sources. We are immersed in sound. It's the opposite of the separation you get with sight. Okay, so vision separates, sound merges us and connects us to the world around us. And the other thing about sight, which is a separating component, is that you look at something, you don't affect it, and it's indifferent to you. So there is no physical response to the fact that you are paying attention to it, which again is so different from something like touch. So the eye gives you the experience, the eye, the visual eye, that I, the pronoun, is the center of the world, is unique, is isolated, is autonomous, is discrete. I and the I together are a really powerful pair that I think deserve attention in terms of understanding the nature of our world. Okay, put these two eyes together really briefly, big subjects in a nutshell, scientific method. All right, what are the physical interactions between the thing being observed and the observer? Well, the only thing that is permitted is the I, because any other kind of interaction would be complex and interfere with the quote objectivity of what is being studied. So because we are aloof and separate through visual interactions, the I is a primary component of studying things through the scientific method. Anything other than the eye is untidy, it's warm, it's smelly, it's moist, it's messy. Vision is like remote sensing. It is clean, it's cold, it's detached. Okay, it doesn't interfere with information gathering that is supposed to be objective. That's because vision separates. All right, what about technology? Here's another example of I and I together. We eliminate so many aspects of the physical organism to save labor and to surpass any kind of human capacities. So we decommission the body. We don't really need it. We have the eye and a finger for push button technologies. We turn a dial, we press a key. What about economics and politics? I and I centered societies. The individual is the primary unit of society. We really cultivate individualism, private ownership, competition, anything other than community. And then we get to art itself. Western art conventions celebrate the I and the I. Can you see that? Glorifies individual genius. That's the big I with the capital letter. Somehow the gifted special individual gets particular attention. And what does Western art do? Celebrates the I, the visual experience. You don't touch this kind of art. You don't smell it. You don't taste it. You are a distant observer. This really is apparent in landscape art, where the artist is outside observing the scene. The scene is not altered by the fact that it's being observed. The relationship is distance and purely visual. And I propose to you that the way we respond to most things in the world, even if it's not a landscape, is in the manner of landscape. So that's a lot. Do you get it all? I and I really prevail in so many components of our culture. And when you think about it, there are different approaches you can take to this reality. You can acknowledge all the feats that have been accomplished by this I culture. It's responsible, I think, for technological innovations, scientific discoveries, keeping record-breaking populations alive, extending lifespans, exploring distant planets. We can go on and on, right? But on the other side, there is the byproduct of all of these accomplishments, which comes in the form of social inequities and massive environmental disruptions. And so I think while we credit the I culture for all of these amazing accomplishments, we also have to blame it for nuclear waste and climate change and depleted soils, contaminated air, polluted water, escalating extinctions that all are threatening life on planet. As an artist, we either condone the I by privileging the self and creating art that focuses, features visual exchanges, or if we choose to withdraw from that scenario, we are making a different statement, and that is we question the validity, we question the benefits that have accrued through the I culture. And so maybe we as artists might gather up our resources to search for an alternative way of creating art that establishes a different set of values. That's the small I instead of a big one, that is holistic, relates the whole body, activates the whole body rather than just the eye. So I've been thinking a lot throughout the last chunk of my life about, can art manifest partnering, companionship, a kind of respectful cooperation among humans and between humans and other species? Can it replace visual dependency on a more immersive multiplicity of senses? The only way I can think of that happening is if we as humans learn to live by the constraints that dictate the life of other species, wild species, not domesticated ones. And that is, can we learn to live within our niche, which means that we live according to the resources that are available in our local area. So the question is, can we as artists, and should we, well, that's the first question for each of you. And if so, can we replace seeing is believing with some kind of gut holistic knowledge? So those are the goals of our little ice interaction. So you want to take a look at your ice cube and let me know, raise your hand if your ice cube has survived this long narrative. How's it doing? Yeah, you got it. You got it. Hey, I see hands. This is fantastic. Okay, so here's how this little ice cube interaction attempts to address these big cultural ethical issues. All right. There's ice cube interaction and artwork. That means I can summon an ally that's available to all of us as artists. And that ally is metaphor. And I know that metaphor is the way that we can get things, concepts that are too complex and too large and too mysterious and too frightening to become manageable. And the issue that is too complex and too frightening and too overwhelming that we are beset with these days seems to be climate change. And there is a whole movement. There are legions of artists trying to figure out how to incorporate climate change into their artwork when it is so unwieldy and so terrifying. So what I've done is to use metaphor to make it manageable. And so I am declaring that your ice cube is a metaphor for a glacier. So scale changes, but it's a pretty good correlation because a lot of other things don't change. The glacier, like the ice cube, is really reactive and vulnerable and sensitive to external conditions. I think what is really important is that they are subject to melting and evaporating, and they can't determine their own fate. And probably most important is that their fate in both cases pretty much hinges on what we humans do and the environment that we create for them. Okay, so what I'd like to do is think about you and your cube as a metaphor for a glacier and humanity. Okay, so on one sense, just by living in the kind of technologized world we share right now, we are ice cube enemies. If you look around your room, you can probably see, I'll bet you, more than just a few gadgets that are generating heat right now. Okay, so your lifestyle is endangering the life of the ice cube, and perhaps the lifestyle of masses of people have a comparable effect on glaciers. But that's not all that happened in our little ice cube exchange. You behaved as the ice cube's caregiver, and I saw lots of hands go up, which showed me that indeed your caregiving had an effect, and your ice cube did not melt away as it might have if you hadn't intervened to extend its longevity. So your effort is also a metaphor. And that is what you did as an individual might also indicate what millions of us could do if we worked together to see if we could slow the melting of the glaciers. And with all the hands going up, I think we learned in this little exercise that we can be effective, even if we have no resources but our own ingenuity, to intervene on behalf of something that is not human, but really needs our help. So art carries a message. A tiny little object can carry a great big message. And in my own mind, what I try to do over and again is see if we can construct a message which is inspiring and optimistic and encouraging. Okay, so let's go on to the next part. I thought maybe I'd show you some examples of other interactions, because interactions are the primary component of my art practice. And I think the SVA MFA program is fabulous. I only know of one other program which I would recommend as highly, and I'm privileged to be a part of it. So that's the Nomad MFA at the University of Hartford. Both of these programs go far and above most of the other programs in terms of preparing you to make a contribution to the evolution of art. So the examples I'm going to show you in just a second come from my interactions with them. The Nomad program is a low residency program. And when they're in residence, they're not necessarily on the campus of the university, but they go to different locations for intensive, usually a week-long exposure to some area which has a particular kind of climate, a particular kind of cultural history, is somehow actively engaged with contemporary art, and students go and get a real intensive experience with that particular locale. So one of the locales that they come to is to me. The whole class comes, spends a week with me, and we go through a series of this kind of interaction. They start at dawn and end at bedtime for an entire week. We are really immersed. So I thought I would start by showing you why they come to me and what it is that the director, Carol Hadford, felt would be useful to the students. So let's do a screen share and let's try to get this up. Okay, hey, move over. Okay, and slideshow. How's that? Okay?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. So this is the home that my husband and I designed and built. This in itself could be the topic of an hour-long lecture, but our goal was multiple. One was to create a building that was ultimately efficient and ecological, ultimately environmentally secure and safe, absolutely economical as well. So maybe I should go back just a minute and tell you how it happened that we built this on this place, and the little backstory that guided all the decisions we made here. I had this deep longing to get back into the country where I had lived before, and most recently was living in a town environment, and found a lovely piece of land, 11 acres in the Hudson Valley, and just fell in love with it. And I remember speaking to a friend. He was out in California, I was in New York, and I was telling him about the piece of land I had just purchased. And I remember telling him that there's a mountain view and there's a stream that runs along the western side of the property, and there's a beautiful meadow, and the sun sets over the Catskill Mountains every night. And I went on, and I remember the last words I spoke were, "Oh, it's so beautiful." And this person at the other end of the phone said 3 words that absolutely rocked my reality and changed everything in terms of my association, possibilities, and what I was ever going to do for the rest of my life. So I said, "Oh, it's so beautiful." It was greeted first with a very long silence. And I wondered what I had said that seemed controversial or offensive. And after the very, very long silence, this guy says, "Is that all?" And I remember hanging up the phone, feeling like, oh my gosh, what has just happened? What else should land be that you want to live on other than beautiful? I had always, up till then, related to land as if it was landscape and appealing only to the visual sense, which meant I would be distanced from it in being an observer and admirer, but not a participant. So I remember going around on this raw piece of land that hadn't been touched for hundreds of years, saying, what should it be? What is it? What can it be other than beautiful? And the first thing I noticed was stones. Stones are everywhere. And I was wondering, what am I going to do? There are just stones everywhere. And then gradually it dawned on me, maybe the other thing this land can be for me is a resource. And so if you see the fencing in the front and the stones going up the walkway, this is the beginning of our engagement with this property in not just an aesthetic manner, but also in a functional one. So I'm going to fly through, show you lots and lots of images. If you have questions on anything, just hold on and we will, I'll happily address them later. So we looked for materials to incorporate into our building program, outside as well as inside. So I was foraging like crazy and bringing things in, bringing rocks and cedar posts and limbs and whatever else I could find in order to incorporate what was beautiful outside, inside. Fencing is a major part of what we did on the land. The left is a root fence, the right is the fencing. Now see, this is what I think for me is so remarkable. This is not just an aesthetic design. The first fence I had in this area for my lambs was very different, and I kept having a problem with the coyotes helping themselves to the lambs. And so I did some research and I found that coyotes don't like jagged tops. So I made a flimsy little fence with jagged tops, and we never had a problem again. The aesthetics emerge out of the function. Stone everywhere. We started doing banking and terracing because there was also no soil. And so when you terrace, you can create soil. One of the great accomplishments of my life is that I know how to make fertile soil. They became gardens as well. a fire pit where we gather and watch the sunset as at the end of the day. There was an unsightly part of the property. The only part that was unsightly was used as a hole where gravel had been taken out. So what do you do with the big hole on your beautiful property? You make an amphitheater. So here's the amphitheater we created where we've had lots and lots of events. This is, of course, the garden. Everybody has a garden. This is what it looks like early spring. Later on, it begins to look like this and this. I also garden in the winter. This is a cold frame, which is not at all technologically sophisticated. It is the simplest device that allows you to grow greens all year. So I shovel off the snow and help ourselves with fresh greens. I get lots and lots of produce, more than I can possibly use in a season. So I do a bunch of canning and freezing and drying so that for the most part through the year, we are eating the fruits and vegetables that we produced on the site. We try to bring all kinds of life in and out of the property. So outside, we're building habitat, more and more habitat. We want wildlife there. Inside, this is an aviary. Inside, this is a goldfish pond right in the entryway. And of course, the stones all come from the property. We raise bees, so we have our own honey. Local means really local to me. It's my own backyard. This is maple syrup. I'm tapping the trees to collect the sap. I don't know if you know about how you do that. The sap is just the most delicate, mildly sweet kind of liquid. I treat my other animals to little bits of it, but you have to boil it down to make it into a syrup. And so 40 gallons of sap will make 1 gallon of syrup. I just think I'll pause right here to say this is not just dashing around going from function to function and taking care of business. I've learned to kind of pause and acknowledge the significance of each of these activities. So the maple syrup is kind of become ritualized year after year. I happen to have a bunch of sugar maples right near my office, and I can see them when I'm sitting at my desk and I got to know each and every tree. So I pick out the ones that seem particularly young and strong and vital, and kind of ask permission if I can have some of the sap when it rises in late February, early March. I use the wood from the old and dead maple trees to boil the sap. When all this process is done, I gather up the ashes and give them back to the young trees that gave me their sap to show my gratitude. Whoops, bad side, we have an orchard, we have a berry patch. I do a lot of foraging. Foraging is an experience that is so different from walking through the woods, and I'll talk a little more about that later. Foraging for mushrooms. This is a puffball found on the property. I also forage for wild yeast and make bread. Okay, lots and lots of critters. The fowl yard has geese and chickens and ducks and turkeys. Oh, there they are. We get babies in the spring. Oh my gosh, what happens in this thing is that every season is a unique throughout the year, and spring is just so full of life, and we have babies in very many different categories. I put a few slides together to show the other thing that I have learned and become so ingrained in me through doing this kind of practice is that you can't control outcomes, and you know what? That's just fine. So we have lots of wild bird feeds throughout the property. And they're meant for wild birds, but the chickens have discovered them and they are eating the wild bird seed. And we have all relaxed and said, okay, if the turkeys want to eat the pig food, the turkeys will enjoy the pig food. This was an interesting year when our domesticated geese decided to cohab with the wild geese. And that's a long story, but there they are. This is what the meadow looks like. And that's the distant view that I was talking about with the Catskill Mountains. Chickens are supposed to go into their little house and sometimes they don't want to, and they just nest in the trees. And sometimes unfortunate things happen. Our little duck with the bad leg, can you see that? Who's required some extra care. So it's not like everything is blissful and it goes according to clockwork and you can always predict something wonderful is going to happen. Day by day, there are surprises. This is Dorky Porky, most adorable little piggy. We gave him a beautiful area, a pen to live in, and he just kept escaping. He refused to stay in it. He would climb up the outer thing, and then we discovered he was lonely. We put him in with the lamb and everything was just fine. Here's our beautiful turkey. You live like this, you got sex going on all over the place. There's like constant erotic interactions taking place, and constant reminders of life and death. And the new book that isn't yet published that I just wrote has all to do with predator-prey relationships, has all to do with eating, has to do with the order of you requiring food while you're alive and becoming food as well. A controversial subject, but we have taken that to heart as well. So what I see my animals do, I try to emulate in my own practice. So here we are skinning a rabbit for rabbit stew. We are plucking chickens. This is a year's supply of chickens that we did in one day. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the activities that go on the homestead. Based on that, the Nomad MFA students come, and I call the week Timeout, Tune Up, Turn On, because what we do very methodically is work with the different sensory capabilities that our human body comes equipped with, and we engage them with the wildlife that is available on my property and the domestic life as well. So this is the classroom. One of the first things we do is an exploration of the woods in terms of texture, not looking, but feeling. So I make a bunch of these bags, and the bags have different kinds of textural categories on them. And we all go foraging in the woods, and one bag gets filled with bumpy items, another with brittle items, high relief, low relief, smooth, curved, prickly. I have like 20 different textures. And so people exchange bags. We go around and fill these bags with objects, not according to their function, not according to their category of any kind, just according to the tactile relationship we can form with them. And then the students do different activities with the different categories of object. When you forage, you already have an intimate experience as opposed to walking through the woods. It means you slow down. It means you get down on your hands and knees. We are only foraging for very little objects that we can hold in our hand. So the experience has to be intimate. When you're down there, you're touching and you're smelling, you're seeing them in their tiny little habitats and having a very different experience than walking through the woods and seeing it as a grand vision. Here we did a walk, and the walk was find evidence of decomposition. So it's just fun to reverse everything and get people's minds to do a switch. So often when we go walking through the woods, we're looking for the freshest flower and the prettiest leaf. But as essential as that to the health of the environment is the whole process of decomposition. So that developed into a soil making workshop where we brought together our decomposed objects and helped the ecosystem along, making soil that was then planted with wild plants and did a whole bunch of stuff with. I taught them how to build stone walls, and the curved object you see in the back is a little unusual. I don't know if you're aware of solitary bees, but this is one of the habitats we created with the MFA students. And this little tubes that are put inside of the circular pieces of trunk become the nesting areas for solitary bees. So solitary bees don't make honey, they don't have hives, but they're terrific pollinators. So it's really important to encourage them to populate your area. There are the bees. We did a whole bunch of stuff. We had looked inside the hives, and the students saw an amazingly organized society, which is really vast and vital. So I tried to time their visit when something very special happens. Can you tell what they have in their hands? Can you see? So these are day-old chicks, and so we interact with all kinds of life as well. Fire is always a part of the week events. The person on the left is Michael Asbill, a wonderful artist who I invited to join us. And here we collected wood from the forest. We got mud from the forest, put them all together. We're making charcoal that we will then use to make drawings and things. And I also we just did a little bit of an ice workshop, which I have often done in a much larger way. This is a fire workshop, and essentially we do the same thing with fire that you did with the ice cube. And that is, you take oversized matches and think about all the ways the human body can interact with the match to slow down the burning as a metaphor for our consumption of fossil fuels. Here we're picking wild edibles we eat together. And this is a sound project in which the students are divided up into groups of 2 and 3 and located up and down on a stream. And the idea is to create a water sound sculpture using only the materials that are found in that area. And so they're down, they're getting their feet dirty, they're really, really close. It's like foraging, but in this case, what we're creating is a sound environment. And then after all of the little sculptures that are designed to splash and drip and gush and guzzle and make all the different sounds that water makes, we start at the top of the stream, and as a group, we walk down the stream to hear the river symphony. Here we're making the solitary bee habitat. So what this all means is that, is it okay if I keep on going? Anybody want to pause here? Mark, what do you think?
Well, yeah, we could take a quick pause, or or continue. What do you? So I'll take your.
Okay, so what I have here, because I think I threw a whole lot at people, I kind of wrote a little manifesto, 10-point manifesto. Shall we go through that? Because it summarizes all that we've been saying, and then you can tell me if you want to continue or something. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the turn on, tune up, timeout manifesto. And so it's kind of like, it occurred to me just a minute ago, the 10 commandments, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. So this is a thou shalt not for the kind of art that is made with the small eye and multi-sensory interactions in mind, all right? So the first one is, an artist is not an observer. The artist, I'm going to read this so we get through it really fast. The artist discards the sense of self as a discrete, autonomous entity. The artist heals the divide that separates the perceiving human from the perceived surroundings that visual perceptions instill. The two is, the artist is not isolated in the studio, but instead is immersed in, responds to, and is conscious of affecting the surrounding conditions. The artist remains embedded in the surroundings, and the environment is included in perceptions of self. Creation and experience of the artwork are not exclusively visual. Okay, it doesn't mean they can't be visual, but they can't be exclusively visual. The artist enlists and cultivates parts of the physical organism that are excluded from experience of art for centuries, and recently from the creation of art as well. So the perceived world exists beyond the conventions of landscape. So it includes the soundscape, the tastscape, the tactile scape, and all that. The artist does not claim creative control of the artwork. Excuse me, gotta mix that. Hold on. Sorry. The artist welcomes the outcomes that cannot be controlled or predicted that are introduced by temperature, moisture, airflow, topography, texture, and other forms of life. The artist discards mediums that are neutral in favor of materials that assert their true natures. Does that make sense to you? The medium, like paint, isn't talking about paint. It's trying to become either the expression of the artist or representing something else. So the medium itself is not asserting itself. It complies with the artist's will. Whereas in this kind of art, the materials assert their own physical characteristics. So they may be reactive, or they may be living and dead. They could be biological or inert. Okay. The artwork is not a depiction, representation, interpretation, abstraction, digitization, or simulation. The materials retain their own identity. An acorn remains an acorn in the work of art as it was out of the work of art. So the artwork excludes outlines. Material objects have edges, but they don't have outlines. Outlines are inventions that separate objects, inventions by an artist. They're artificial and they're contrived. In ecosystems, everything is connected. It cannot be represented by outlines. The artist is not self-expressive. Personal thoughts, feelings, observations interfere with the ability to evoke the dynamics of the non-human environment. And the last one, artistic success is not measured by fame or fortune. In this kind of art, success is measured in terms of the effect on the ecosystems and the populations. So the artist is excluded from the definition of success. He's successful if something outside of the artist benefits. So I could continue or we could pause.
Maybe, maybe we could take a couple of questions and then you could continue. There was one in the chat. Carolina would like to know how many people live and work on your homestead.
Well, I have a very open homestead. So officially children have moved out. My husband and I are there, but we have very open door policy. In terms of maintaining it, I have a pet peeve and I will share it with you because people say, oh, what a lot of work. And I say, oh, what a lot of pleasure. Don't take away any of these activities. So reluctantly, I might get a young man there to do some heavy lifting, but I don't want to share the effort and the engagement because that is what is so reassuring and reinforcing and uplifting and everything wonderful in my life. So if the implication of that question was how many people and how many people work and how many people benefit, I hope a lot of people benefit and very few work. But the work, I have another project that I'm going to do one of these days, and that is the joy of what we call mundane labor. And I could talk about that one for a long time. We so degrade digging ditches and moving biological matter from this place to that, when I find it the most rewarding and a whole lot more rewarding than sitting at the darn computer all the time. So I would love to do something on reestablishing labor as a desirable human activity. But I don't know if I answered the question the student had asked. Is that okay?
I think you did. It's basically you and your partner, right?
Yeah, so he loves to do constructing. I guess I didn't show you things like we have pheasants, and he made a beautiful pheasant house or the enclosure that the animals are in. So he does more of that sort of thing. I take care of living matter and the stones. Yeah, so I guess we divided that way.
It seems to me that, so a term that I don't think you use, but that I know is one of your guiding principles is permaculture. And it might be a good time for you to speak a little bit about permaculture principles. And I know you could also talk probably for an hour or many hours about that, but also permaculture vis-a-vis labor and the idea of farming and gardening and, basically, having, edible things growing around you in a way that doesn't take a huge amount of time and that isn't, that doesn't degrade land, but rather, improves it and enriches soil and is very, biotically rich in bios.
So the idea of permaculture is that you don't just have a garden and bring in from the garden supply store the fertilizer and all the things that need to thrive. That every component feeds another component of your homestead. So there is never anything inside that we would call waste, because every object is not used by one system is going to have to be useful for another system. So it's this beautiful web of reciprocity. This one gives and then it gets, and we all give and get. And that is the philosophy that now determines what I feed other people and what I eat, because it has to do with having to sustain us, our bodies, which means we are cultivating and taking. But then the big question is, what are we giving back? So seeing something as a resource or even cultivating new resources seems like half of the equation. And the other half of the equation is, besides taking, what can you give. So I asked the turkeys, I'm giving you this grain, I'm giving you life, what are you going to give back to me? And if we eat a turkey, then what happens to the feathers of the turkey and the bones of the turkey, and every component is going to be parceled out so that there's never an end point to a process. It's all continuing and ongoing. And it's beautiful, it's harmonious. It makes the cycle of life very comforting when you know that what might have seemed like a termination at one point now becomes a pause in an ongoing evolution of life.
Thank you. We've got a question from Dylan. Dylan asks, when you said creation and experience of artwork are not exclusively visual, this reminds me of philosopher John Dewey's theories of art. Do you always tend to favor experience over physical/final product, as his theory states, and then in parentheses, regardless of the art form's medium?
Yeah, I mean, I do, exactly. And if an object is able to elicit a strong experience, all the better. But I don't think the object is the final evidence of an artwork. I think it has to do with how people or the audience or somebody is resonating with it, responding to it. So I really think of art, whether it's an object or not, as a form of communication. And it doesn't become art until it has somehow received the acknowledgement of an audience. And so, yeah, I think of art as a public good. And it's not something you put in the bank. It's out there, it seems to me, working on culture all the time, making statements and stirring things up or providing some kind of a resolution if that's what's needed, but it's having an effect.
I wanted to follow up with a question that relates, and then maybe we could go on to eco-materialism. And that is whether or not you think of your homestead as an artwork along the lines that you've been describing, because it seems to me that you really could. And I'm wondering, like, you know, if you do, does it have a title or a name? And if you don't, why not?
So nothing has surprised me more than all the attention we get regarding the homestead. And so I did not declare it an artwork, but it has been declared an artwork by other people. And I'm so honored, frankly, when we do have, you know, I was just saying how an artwork is something that you share and that has an impact. And I never thought the homestead was anything other than a private excursion into an alternative way of living. But now that it seems to be attracting an audience, I have to reconsider that. And people are so delighted to be there. They come, they want to work with me, and they stay for a while. They're there and up at dawn and enjoying the quality of the air and doing things that their typical days did not include. I've had so many amazing interactions with people, and it's a gift for me to be able to share these deep feelings with other people. So I didn't intend it that way. I never would have positioned it that way, but it's falling on by in a default way into categories where it kind of feels like that.
Well, it makes a lot of sense to me. It seems to actually fulfill all of the criteria of your 10-point manifesto that you just articulated.
So that was one thing I really want everyone to know, and that is this manifesto came about yesterday. And it's not as if I had a whole refined philosophy when I undertook this, and what I was going to do is manifest these preconceived ideas. it just evolved of its own accord. And it's been so interesting to think back on and to be asked to talk about it to students like you all.
Well, it
And-
sounds like it was a process of learning by through this kind of discovery of this kind of partnership or friendship relationship with the land, the soil, the plants and trees, the ecosystem, and all the animals and creatures that you're actually practicing eco-materialism. So maybe on that note, could you introduce us to this concept of eco-materialism and also perhaps relate it to new materialism or neo-materialism, which many of our students, I think, may not be familiar with as a philosophical.
Okay, I'm going to give you the 3-minute version, so don't panic, everybody. So I'm going to make a confession. I became totally engaged with gathering more and more skills that would allow me to extricate myself from the industrial mass-produced kind of engagement with materials and discover something that for me was so much more vital and fulfilling. And I actually thought I was going a little bit crazy. I thought this was totally idiosyncratic. I was not talking about it with people who were really close to me because I thought they were going to think I was completely gone. And then it started occurring to me. I said, the environment is so crucially an issue of our era. And that if I look over the avant-gardes in the past, artists have always dealt with the most crucial issue of their era. And while I thought I was working in an isolated way, in some tangential manner that would be irrelevant to anybody else, I started looking for other artists who might share some of the values that I was seemingly inventing on my own. And what did I find? I found not dozens, hundreds. And that's when I started writing about something I call eco art. It is definitely a movement. It is international. It is vital. It is the place where I think the essence of creativity and innovation and necessity are all coinciding. So the first thing that happened is that I discovered quite by accident that I was part of a movement. And then in reaching out to these other artists, I found out that they too thought that they were isolated and doing something that was not relevant to the era. And so we've begun to form a community. And we've given ourselves a name. We call ourselves eco art. Okay, so eco art is everything. It can be anything. I mean, if you talk about the environment, you're talking about all the ecosystems of the world, every component of them. There is just no defining characteristic except the intention to attend to the problems of the planet. So then I'm continuing to work and I'm discovering more and more about material interactions that are not part of the landscape or the currency of typical 21st century behaviors. And I'm pursuing this as what I thought was a kind of a fork away from eco art, but in its own category. And once again, what I discovered is this is not just me. It's not idiosyncratic. I have not developed anything original. There is this huge turn to the material. And it's a turn away from the visual of the 1980s and thereabouts. And so neo-materialism emerged as a burgeoning philosophical system. Regrettably, they use the word materialism, which suggests crass consumerism or something like that, which couldn't be further from what the neo-materialists are proposing. And what they're proposing is what I was telling you about today, relishing the material, attending to it, rediscovering its significance and the joys that it can give you. So I started an immersion into neo-materialism as a philosophy, and I discovered it is sweeping academic disciplines, materialism in anthropology and archaeology and sociology and psychology, on and on. I have lists of different disciplines in which materialist literature has been published. And I'm looking at this and I say, there's everything here but art. Where is art in the discussion of neo-materialism? And so I thought, oh my gosh, if no one else is going to do it, looks like I've got my next project before me. And then as I began to explore neo-materialism in art, I realized something really significant was happening. And that was the artists are focusing on materialism as it relates to an environmental condition. And so there are all kinds of neo-materialisms. There are different terms, and the terms are associated with different scholars, and it's all complex, and it's this huge array of materialist thinking. And I just said, what the heck, we need one more. We got to do eco-materialism, which had not been included in that list. And artists are doing such profoundly significant work in that regard that it looks like this is they've got to be brought together and brought to the attention, mostly of MFA students in arts seniors or major seniors, because you're the ones who can carry the mantle and really develop it. It's however active it is, it's a baby movement, and there is lots of room, and I admit to being a recruiter. So can I say one more thing? I know I'm going on and on. But,
do you have any slides to go along with this part, or?
I'm sorry.
Were there slides that you wanted to show during this part, or do you want to keep the share going?
Yeah, I think you're probably exhausted. I mean, I could, but it's okay. So here's what I have a message for the students, all right? Because I've been thinking about it. And the last thing I want is for any of you to think that this is the only way contemporary art should be created, because I absolutely would never admit to that or suggest that. So here's the way I hope you will think about your own careers, that if we use ecosystems as a model of human behavior, there are 3 ways you can engage with the ecosystem, all right? You can be an eco-materialist and defy the conventions of Western art, start all over again, dump the eye, dump the other eye, see what you can do to wipe the slate clean and start again. But that's not the only way to serve the ecosystem. So ecosystems also need something called homeostasis. We can't all be revolutionaries. The system would collapse. We also need a balancing mechanism, something that stabilizes. So it's like the body. You get cold, you get goosebumps and shivers, and then you get warm again, yeah? So maybe some of you feel like you really want to perpetuate the traditions. And in that way, you're stabilizing society as we go through a morphing process. And that's useful too. Or it occurred to me, new, I don't think is brand new if it refers to technologies that are at the cutting edge of some kind of development. Okay, I would think of that as evolution. It's a development of an established way of using materials and establishing a point of view. So maybe you are a homeostatic artist stabilizing the culture. Maybe you are an evolutionary artist who is perpetuating the tradition but updating it. Maybe you are an eco-materialist artist who is feeling revolutionary, that some radical change is what's required, and we're going to begin again, rewrite the rules of art making and propose a fresh beginning. So, got it? But I just think it's so important for you to articulate that to yourself. You've got these three choices. They're all useful. But I feel you're going to do better at any one of these three roles if you really define what your position is with regard to the existing culture. But also know that if you choose to make a painting that is self-expressive and oriented to the eye and the visual sense, that you are perpetuating a set of values, that you are affirming what exists, that you approve it, and you want to reinforce it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. There was a question. There was a question earlier about one of your 10 points, and then maybe you could go back to the slide about neutral. The artist discards mediums that are neutral in favor of materials that assert their character or their true natures. That there was some confusion about that, and I think it connects with what you were just talking about in terms of, materialism, whether it's new materialism or eco-materialism.
Absolutely, yeah.
Could you just sort of unpack that a bit, and then we can move on to another question that we have from another student.
Okay. When you work with a medium, it submits to the will and the vision of the artist. So the more neutral that medium is, the more it can serve to express the interests and the feelings, the observations, whatever they may be, of the artist. You get it? So that's so different from a material. So a material is you look at the work of art and you see what it's constituted out of. Its integrity is intact. You know that particular object has not been altered. So I would say, okay, as an example, if you take a bunch of acorns and you arrange them in such a way so that they become a depiction of a dog's face, they're a medium. They're made then to express the artist's vision. But those acorns, when they are placed in a context where they remain acorns, are the materials. And this is what the eco-materialists and the neo-materialists are proposing. Let the materials speak for themselves. They don't have to be subjected to the whims and desires of a human. It's another way for humans to assert control. When you work with the medium, when you work with the material, then the material asserts itself. Got it? So it's a way of demonstrating a small I.
Thank you. It also reminds me of object-oriented ontology. And the idea, I'm not well suited to probably trying to explain what object-oriented ontology is, but my sense is that it's partly the idea that being resides in objects themselves as opposed to our ideas about objects. And so it was Siki and Suyi who were asking about medium versus material. And I think that could be just a helpful way to think about it. A medium, you think about the word medium has a couple of other meanings in English. An art medium, of course, like acrylic gel medium or linseed oil. Or you could think also of marble as a medium, right? It's, as you put it, neutral, and you transform it and use it to communicate. Media is the plural of medium, right? And so we talk about the media industries. These are industries that are built on communication using these sort of neutral media like radio, television, film, the internet, etc., animation, virtual reality, gaming. And then, you know, also, if you look back to, say, the 19th century, there are these people who played the role of mediums who would communicate between the, you know, the physical world and the spirit world. So what I think Linda is suggesting is that we move from medium to material, where the material has, we were sort of respect the ontology or the thingness of these objects that we are engaging with in a more of a kind of a partnership rather than a relationship of exploitation and extraction of meaning, or you don't destroy the thing and use it to make something else.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay.
The other part of that is that when we do that, they talk about every material having a vitality. And by releasing it, you can channel that vitality that is being suppressed when you use something as a medium. And so in that way, your life is so enriched. So even if you're talking about something like a stone, everything is emitting its character. And we either clue into that and open up the communication channels to receive that message, or we turn them off. And we have been, as a culture, not receptive to it, but I think there is a major shift. I mean, I think the fact that there is a philosophical basis for this approach really testifies to its validity, rather than it seeming like the aberration of a few crazy artists. I mean, it is really grounded in the deepest scholarship that's happening today.
Noelle has a question. Linda, do you have any suggestions for students who are interested in creating experiences that will serve the ecosystem in accordance with some of your commandments? I'm interested in the work you do on your homestead, but I have limited resources, live in the city, etc. Where can I begin? What are some smaller scale things that you would suggest that students with similar interests look into or start with? Oh, I have a whole bunch of ideas, but I'm curious to hear.
Oh, no, I'd love to hear yours. You or me?
What's that?
I said, you want, the student has ideas, or you?
You know, there's often little bits of land around the trees and the tree pits on the sidewalk. There's all kinds of little margins and places. There's, you know, the Gowanus Canal and Newtown Creek, and I don't know what neighborhood you're in, Noelle, but there are, you know, ecological interfaces all around us. The city is very porous, and rethinking the city as, you know, an ecological space is really important work right now as we move past the point where half the world's population lives in urban settings. So it's not like nature is out there. It's, you know, right around us, although it doesn't always feel that way on 21st Street. But what would you say, Linda? How can a student who lives in Manhattan and, you know, is given a little cubicle on the 9th floor of a building in Chelsea and told to make art, how can we put these principles into practice?
Have you got a windowsill? If you got a windowsill and you've got some sunshine, you're in business. I mean, do you know what it cost me to make my art? Nothing. Nothing. Don't let money be in your way. If you forage for materials and make offerings to the public, they don't have to pay you and you don't get any money for it, but you also don't have any expenses. Just do it. And if you do it in the elevator going up with 2 people, that's valuable as well as getting out to a crowd of, you know, a couple hundred and getting applause at the end of your performance. Just do it. Do it at any scale at all. It is so much fun. you'll do it for your own as well as others' benefits. Or maybe you want to take in, you see, an abandoned nest. Why don't you take that on as your project, or a pigeon with a broken leg, or anything around that could use your interaction? It doesn't have to be human to human. There are trees that would love to get your watering on a hot summer day. That's also an act of loving and consideration and can be called art. So this sounds like a sermon. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, but it's not a hurdle to overcome. It's not like you're casting bronze.
So a comment from Stephanie is just that this is reminding them a lot of ecosexuality.
Yeah, it's sensual. It's a turn on. I absolutely agree.
When you mentioned, making your art in the elevator during an elevator ride, I also wondered about performance and action-based or activity-based or behavior-based artistic practices that often are particularly immaterial and ephemeral.
Yes, great.
Based in language or movement. But here we go, another question from Maho. Maho writes, I remember you showing the forage workshop based on different types of textures and categorizing each texture using words. I would like to know your thoughts on the usage of words when we interrupt our surroundings and the way we understand. What do you think is the difference between words and the quote unquote I?
I think that is a terrific question and lots to be pondered there. The fact that we are so committed to the printed word is one thing. So actually I gave some thought to just seeing if I could conduct that workshop orally rather than having the word written, because I don't know if the student agrees, but those two methods of conveying language are absolutely different one from the other. But I succumbed. I think the students bringing up a really challenging point. And I think I've got to give more thought to it. I mean, I write books. Is that hypocritical? I've wondered about that as well.
Yeah, so I was thinking about how to ask the question, right? So I'll just decide to ask it. You spoke about the I as a projection of one's individual or individuality, but I and that's a Western notion. I am of the understanding that you have knowledge of other cultures and civilizations. Um, do you know anything of the Osirican doctrine that speaks of the I as a part of a collective consciousness? And you made mention of the physical eyes, as seeing as a kind of way of seeing reality, or reality as we know it. But there's also the idea that the I is something that's spiritual, that connects you to a much more metaphysical kind of experience. I was wondering about your experience, because yes, you can relinquish the I as quote unquote the capital or the center of one's own consciousness, but to me there can be a link to a kind of collective knowing and being. So what do you think about that idea? It's more along the line of Osirican doctrine than anything else, if I'm making any sense.
I don't know enough about cultures to comment, except that I'm aware that there are so many cultural differences, and I'm sure that the relationship of people in other cultures to visual sense can diverge greatly from our own, and be deeply invested with powers that I think we may ignore in this culture. Is that what you're implying?
Yeah,
Yeah, so
yes, most definitely, sort of.
I would never say that in every culture, when they activate the visual sense, they are also activating a separation and objectivity and all. What we have here is a cluster of situations that privileges or highlights certain aspects of those experiences. So no, you made a really intelligent point, and I thank you for that. I'm sure you said the evil eye, giving the evil eye, you know that term? Which suggests that the eye can convey some power and have a deep effect on the person receiving it. But I don't think that prevails here. And I think it's certainly worthy of attention when you consider other places. Yeah. Now, your comments, everybody, are terrific. I really thank you. They're very thoughtful.
Paulina just mentions in the chat that Chomsky's theory of language talks about universal grammar, which is interesting. I would just relate that, you know, in relation to what we're talking about, the I, the sense of self as a discrete, autonomous entity with an identity, is, I mean, that's a big theme in Buddhist philosophy, thought, and also practice, and how that, I mean, that sense of having a self is, I don't know if it's universal, but it's widespread across lots and lots of cultures, both, you know, across geography and also across time. And but another theme in many, many traditions, including Buddhism, is that that sense of self is a bit of an illusion, and it's something that is constructed within our own consciousness, to help us, you know, navigate and make sense of the world. But there's this other truth of interconnectedness that doesn't give us the same kind of agency, and is sort of differently empowering. And yeah, and so I mean, just, you know, those ideas are getting translated through a more secular practice of mindfulness in our culture, really broadly now. This idea that through, you know, mindfulness we can get past some of those, you know, ways of thinking that end up not serving us, and they're also really reinforced by contemporary research in neuroscience. So it seems to be like the sort of the Western ideas that are, you know, science-based, and Eastern practices that, you know, began more than 2,500 years ago in India are sort of converging in interesting ways.
Mhm.
Maybe I should just give you, Linda, the very last word.
Good luck, everybody. I'm really looking forward to the studio visits, and please do raise any concerns or questions or comments about what I presented when we're together. And I hope to be very, I'm eager to hear what you have to say. I'm an old lady and you are younger. And so I take my clues from you about what's emerging and what's happening in the culture that is going to be significant in the future. So I want to be on the listening side as well as the offering side when we do the studio visits. Please be generous and share your thoughts.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. Good night, everyone. And we'll see you all soon.